If we look back to see the history, we will be astonished by knowing around the globic most war had been fought in the name of religion and a part of land. After listening this, you might think now the situation is changed. These are only the story of past. But still there is a region on the map where people are still fighting in the name of religion and land over the past 100 years. This endless war badly affected the lives of civilians of the nation from all dimensions. Palestine, the nation in crisis. The bitter struggle between Arab and Jews for control the Holy Land. It caused untold suffering in the Middle East to the generations. It is often claimed the crisis originated to the Jewish immigration to Palestine and the foundation of State of Israel. The root of the conflict have to be found much earlier in the British double-dealing during the First World War. This is the story of entry among a rival's empire, of misguided strategies, and of how conflicted promises between Arab and Jews created a legacy of bloodshed, which is determining the fate of the Middle East. And still, economy, education, and politics are distorted.
The deteriorating economic situation in the state of Palestine stems from the century-long conflict between Israel and Palestine. Prior to the Israeli occupation of Palestine in 1967, the territory was a viable and thriving economy with a GDP equivalent to a lower middle-income economy. However, with the progression of the conflict, Palestine has continually been on the verge of economic collapse. The Israeli-Palestine conflict has caused the gradual de-agriculturalization and de-industrialization processes in Palestine due to a loss of key natural resources.
The right to water and sanitation is a fundamental human right enshrined in international convention. In 1967, Israel seized control of all water resources in Palestine. To this day, it retains exclusive control over all the water resources. According to Palestinian Water Authority figures, Palestinians in the West Bank consume a total of 195.8 million cubic meters of water in 2018. Due to all these factors, they suffer a constant shortage of water that is largely man-made. Gaza's water and sanitation infrastructures are heavily damaged by Israeli bombings. The estimated damage amounts to some $34 million. As of the end of 2018, more than 100,000 Palestinians in Gaza were still cut off from the public water network. As there are no other water resources available, the overpumping continues and the aquifer is on the brink of collapse. Residents have no choice but to drink contaminated water. Parents are forced to watch their children drink polluted water. Citizens are cut back on drinking and buy desalinated water from private vendors. Yet, an estimated 68% of this water is also polluted, increasing the danger of diseases spreading among the population.
The Israeli military damaged or destroyed more than 130 educational facilities, including schools, universities, libraries, and trade schools.
Education is the bedrock of every great society. Unfortunately, the people of the state of Palestine have been denied access to this because of the conflict. Since the beginning of the conflict in 1947, when the United Nations adopted the Resolution 181, known as the Partition Plan, the Palestine education system has suffered serious setback. The institutions from schools to universities are being targeted by Israeli airstrikes, killing and arresting many teachers and students, which has led to the destruction of educational facilities and suspension of teaching in most of the Palestinian territories. Under fierce attacks, all of Gaza's 7 universities have been closed. The Islamic University of Gaza, the Gaza Strip's largest university after its buildings were bombed, and Jamal Al-Zibda, a professor of mechanical engineering at the university, was assassinated. Work was suspended in 22 intermediate institutes. About 50 schools in Gaza with more than 24,000 students were bombed and destroyed, and available school buildings are used as refugee camps for victims. In East Jerusalem, a large building affiliated with Al-Quds University was severely damaged as a result of many tear gas canisters and sound bombs fired by the Israeli forces on the campus, causing a fire that left the building burnt and collapsed.
It is the story of fragmented leadership. For decades, the Palestinian politics was familiar with this man, Yasser Arafat. After his death, fractionalism crept in. The political system has been going through intense crisis, the crisis of amorphous political objectives, which gave birth to Fatah and Hamas, 2 leading political movements. Hamas are declared as terrorists by US, Japan, Canada, and EU. They always prefer armed struggle over talks. Both civilian and military targets are fair game for Hamas. Some of their attacks are called war crimes. External powers are also fishing in Palestinian water. West made 2 demands from Hamas: recognition of Israel and commitment to non-violence. 2007, the Battle of Gaza, is a tipping point which widened the split of Fatah and Hamas. The battle ended, Hamas took over the Gaza. They claim of selfless fight, but their leaders, living in 5-star hotels of Turkey, least concerned about the situation. There is no way to reach 2-state solution, reconciliation.
This is not the end. We meet Ken Farrow, who is the UK documentary filmmaker and political activist, for knowing more about crisis in Palestine.
The situation in Palestine for the past 5 years has been the same as it has been for the past 50 years, which is of a state which has no rights. Fundamentally, it has no economy. Its economy is reliant on the state of Israel. The state of Israel controls what economy there is there. And so for the past 5 years, we know that Palestinians have been struggling, particularly in areas like Gaza. Poverty is an issue. There are terrible problems in terms of the psychological situation of the people in Gaza, and so there's problem after problem. It's a question of resources, a question of water, a question of food, a question of just the right to life. And of course, as well as trying to survive economically, they're involved in an embargo, a blockade. It's very difficult to get anything inside Gaza, so the needs of the people are basically not being met by their captors, which is fundamentally the Israeli state. So I think the problem we've seen over the past 5 years and the escalation in terms of the whole Palestinian-Israeli conflict is something which people are obviously increasingly aware of. I think what people need to understand about Hamas, and currently the British government is trying to get Hamas outlawed as a terrorist organization, but we do have to support the right of Palestinian women and Palestinian children and other minorities in Palestine to exist as well. It's a very difficult question of aid, because some people would say that aid is useful, and of course it is. And then if, for example, we talked before about education, if you're a school in Palestine, or if you're the education ministry and you're getting support from the European country, then you will have to accept that support. But really, what Palestine needs is not aid, it needs its own economic power. It needs to be self-determining, it needs to have that power. And so it's pointless just giving aid if there's going to be no future, no right to existence. We have no position externally to be looking at the situation in Palestine, in Gaza, and telling the Palestinians what to do about the way they want to run their society. But of course, we have to support all parts of the community and all parts of society for them to be able to have their own rights within that state. But at the moment, there is a state of war, and so discussions about what should be happening in the state of Palestine are far too early to be having until Palestine is free. When Palestine is free, then the Palestinians will decide about their future. When